The European continent has seen some significant political changes in the last decades, concerning a rise in far-right anti-establishment and anti-immigration parties in most countries, the relating immigration crisis of 2015, the Brexit vote in 2016, and the following turmoil between the EU and the United Kingdom, as well as the Russian annexation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine. In this series, I will try to take a look at the political leadership across the European continent and give light to development in some of the countries outside the main news coverage in most major nations. You can find some more extensive commentary to the decisions I made in researching this series towards the end of the video. Vladimir Putin rose to power in Russia in 2000, succeeding Boris Yeltsin as the president of the geographically largest nation on Earth. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia went into sharp economic decline and even saw a clear loss in life expectancy from 69 to 64 in the mid-90s, and a GDP per capita drop almost in half in just 6 to 7 years, partly due to faulty numbers during the Soviet era. After years of consecutive economic growth in the early 2000s and a more or less successful suppression of the separatist movements in the North Caucasus, reducing the risks of terrorist attacks, Putin enjoyed high popularity numbers. The GDP was, although as reliant on oil and gas incomes as it was, hit hard by the global financial crisis of 2008. And following economic sanctions from Europe and the US after the invasion of Georgia that same year and the war in Ukraine started in 2014, Putin had a much harder time keeping the economy afloat. After 2 terms between 2000 and 2008, switching positions with Prime Minister Medvedev for 4 years, and 2 additional successful elections, partly due to a suppression of opponents and the media in 2012 and 2018, Putin cannot be re-elected in 2024 under current rules. Russia has since 2014, and the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine, been present with troops in Luhansk and Donetsk, 2 regions with armed separatist movements in the eastern part of the country, even though peace agreements have been in place since a couple of years back. Viktor Yanukovych came to the presidency in 2010 and sought to reinforce closer ties to Moscow rather than the European Union, leading to protests in Kiev, and Yanukovych resigning and fleeing to Russia. Petro Poroshenko was elected new president in 2014, and during his presidency, Ukraine has continued to fight separatist troops in the eastern part of the country and establishing closer ties to Europe with a gradual adaptation to the economic market of the European Union and visa-free travel in the Schengen area for all Ukrainian citizens. In 2019, former actor and comedian Volodymyr Zelensky took to play out his role as president of Ukraine in real life, and he announced Oleksiy Honcharuk as the prime minister for the country. Honcharuk offered his resignation in mid-January 2020, but has, after renewed confidence from the president, remained in his position. Another former Soviet nation, Belarus, has taken a more pro-Russian stance in the decades following the fall of the Union. Alexander Lukashenko is the first and so far only president of the nation, serving since 1994. This style of governing, winning its 5th election in 2015, has earned the country the only European nation, other than Russia, to be ranked as authoritarian in the Democracy Index. Belarus has seen a very similar economic trend as Russia, with the fall in the 90s, strong development in the first decade of the 21st century, and stalling numbers since then. Poland and Hungary both became EU countries in 2004, after a decade and a half of democratization following the fall of the Berlin Wall and the sweep of Central and Eastern European states joining NATO and the EU in the 90s and early 2000s. In 2001, the twin brothers Lech and Jarosław Kaczynski formed the Law and Justice Party, and Lech won the presidency 4 years later on a conservative, nationalistic platform. 2 years after that, more central-liberal candidate Donald Tusk won election for prime minister. Later, he will go on to be the president of the European Council and the head of the EPP, the largest conservative party grouping in the European Parliament, while his country went in a rather sharp anti-EU direction. After the death of President Lech Kaczynski in a plane crash in 2010, the Law and Justice Party reformed under a more far-right populist agenda and won the 2015 parliamentary election with a majority of the seats. Andrzej Duda was elected president, and since 2017, Mateusz Morawiecki is the country's prime minister. Even though the party has seen some backlash on its interfering with state-run media, they won re-election in 2019 on an anti-immigration, nationalistic, anti-LGBTQ rights platform, and are supporting harder abortion laws in a country that already has one of the strictest in the European Union. In 2020, Duda is up for re-election in the presidential elections in May. In Hungary, Viktor Orbán came to power in 2010 after a significant drop in popular support for established parties and candidates. His conservative nationalistic party of Fidesz and his style of governing has received harsh criticism from the European Union, but any legal actions has mainly been blocked by Poland and other eastern nations in the Union. Orbán enjoys continued support domestically and won a continued supermajority of the seats in the parliament, both in 2014 and 2018. Both Poland and Hungary have low fertility rates today, at 1.3 to 1.4. This alongside free movement of people within the European Union, and many young leaving for other nations to study or work, has led to demographic problems for the eastern nations of Europe. Slovakia has, unlike most other eastern states in the European Union, joined the Eurozone and has seen a stronger economic development than Poland and Hungary in the last decade. Peter Pellegrini is the serving Prime Minister since 2018, representing the Social Democratic Party, and the current president is Zuzana Kapuchova, representing Social Liberal Progressive Slovakia. The pro-EU stance is under threat in 2020 when right-wing nationalistic party of Kotleba is surging, promoting a Slovak departure from the EU and NATO and establishing closer ties to Russia. The support for the Liberal and Social Democratic parties are pushed down by corruption scandals ahead of the elections in February. The other Czechoslovakian offspring, Czech Republic, has since the Velvet Revolution democratizing Czechoslovakia been dominated by the traditional European major parties of Social Democrats and Liberal Conservatives. Current Prime Minister is on the other hand Andrej Babiš of the ANO, running on a platform of anti-immigration, anti-EU and a crackdown on corruption. Babiš has failed to establish a majority government and failed a vote of confidence in the parliament in 2018 before forming a new government, and has been more EU-friendly after election campaigns finished. After the fall of Nicolae Ceausescu and communism in Romania in 1989, the country took steps towards democratization and has seen periods of stable economic growth and a reduction in corruption, as well as public uproar for legislations that would take the country in the other direction. Under President Klaus Iohannis, elected in 2015 and again in 2019, 10 prime ministers have served. Currently, the position is held by Ludovic Orban, representing the National Liberal Party, same as President Iohannis. Moldova gained independence with the fall of the Soviet Union, but saw a period of instability and military conflict in the eastern part of the landlocked country, leading to a ceasefire in 1992 and the establishing of the de facto, though not internationally recognized self-governing regions of Transnistria to the east and Gagauzia to the south. Moldova would go on to be one of the first post-Soviet Union countries to re-elect a communist government in 2001 and again in 2005. And even though the country has seen a more liberal coalition government form since then, the ties to Russia remain strong. Currently, Igor Dodon serves as president, representing the Socialist Party, and since a vote of no confidence for the former Prime Minister, Ion Kiku now holds that position, previously an advisor to President Dodon. Moldova remains very poor by European standards and still stand below the per capita income level during the 70s and 80s as part of the Soviet Union. Bulgaria suffered similar economic developments in the 1990s, but established a strong economic development during the first decade of the 21st century, joining NATO in 2004 and the EU in 2007. After a political scene dominated by previously communist parties rebranded as socialist, conservative winds have been more present in recent years. Current Prime Minister Boris Borisov serves for the third time since 2009 and has seen the country continue to fall in population as young people seek opportunities abroad and fertility rates remain low. Allegations of corruption and harsh attitudes towards the media has marked the last few years for Bulgaria. In the next video, we will take a look at Scandinavia and the Baltic nations.